Good afternoon, honored guests, distinguished panelists, and valued attendees. I am Liesl Riddle, and I'm the Dean of the College of Professional Studies. I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to our panel discussion on AI at the intersection of cybersecurity. It's truly a pleasure to see each of our distinguished gathering members here today. At GW, we take great pride in our innovative and comprehensive approach to cybersecurity education in multiple disciplines, including business, engineering, law, and other applied fields. The College of Professional Studies, we actually offer an end-to-end educational solution in cybersecurity, including workforce development boot camps, bachelor's and master's programs, as well as executive education programming to meet the evolving demands of this very critical field. But what distinguishes a College of Professional Studies is our faculty, industry experts who impart their wealth of applied knowledge and experience to our students. With evening classes held across multiple locations in Northern Virginia, we ensure accessibility without compromising on quality. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists who embody excellence and innovation in their respective domains. First, we have Christy Grinnell, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at DXC Technology. Mike Euster, Chief Information Officer and Chief Technology Officer at Mantech. Matt Hayden, Vice President for Cyber and Emerging Threats at GDIT. Neil Sarabanthy, CEO of Calypso AI. And last, but certainly not least, moderating our discussion tonight is Dmitry Korolev, Principal in Security Risk Management at Verizon and a valued member of the CPS Advisory Board. Together, their expertise will shed light on the intricate relationship between AI and humans in the fast-evolving industry of cybersecurity. We're going to have 40 minutes for this session, and if time permits, we'll take questions from the audience. Please submit your questions via Pigeonhole so that they can see them in real time. Once again, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Let's embark on this thought-provoking journey together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Riddle, for this excellent introduction. When we think about artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, those are two broad domains and subjects. Let's narrow it down. Today we have Mike Euster, CIO and CTO at Mantech. Mike, in our pre-forum discussion, you identified three main concepts relevant to AI and cybersecurity. Could you please kick us off by sharing the frame and those concepts?
Sure, yeah. Dmitry, I think we've all heard of red, blue, right? But there's the red team, right, which is the offensive team. And then there's the blue team, which is the defensive team, which is many of us, right? And there's also what is known as the gray zone that has many different elements, right? It can be in social engineering, social media, but there's also a cybersecurity element of it as well. So where you've got a conflict, right? Think of war and peace. The gray zone is in between the two. Where you've got a hot conflict, which we have in this world, unfortunately, there are active operations going on. And then there's in the blue space or the peace space where we are right now, we carry on our jobs, our businesses, university, hospitals, whatever we might be doing. And in that gray zone is where things happen. So this is where you see things with China and Taiwan. Or there's been, let's see, the last 3 or 4 months, you probably all saw it in the news, where the Russian SVR is on a major software provider's network, and they stated they do not have them off yet. And another large company has said the same thing, and that is published, right? What is that? That's this gray zone area, and that's where we live in. So AI, what we're working at Mantech is using AI to fill that space with gray zone, and instead of being the blue team where we're just taking incoming, we shift the attack plane, right? So if we're going to spin up one environment, we use AI to spin up the same environment or a similar environment, and then have them masked to be the same. So there's a 50% chance adversary can go one way or the other. Well, what happens if you spin up a third mirage environment, and a fourth mirage environment. Now you're actually using that. So that's kind of the context of where we're all in.
Thank you, Mike. So one of the big questions in cybersecurity market today is the future role of humans against artificial intelligence. So what are your thoughts on this, Neil?
Yeah, sure. So the problem fundamentally with kind of an increasing proliferation of AI from a cybersecurity perspective is the number of attacks and the type of attacks are growing on a, at the moment, linear, but eventually exponential pace. And so the challenge that you quickly run into is if you have increasing number of attacks, increasing sophistication of attacks, how are you able to combat that? Are you just going to constantly try to increase your SOC on a linear basis if you have 100x as many attacks or 1000x as many attacks? Obviously, the answer is no. And so you get into this question, going back to the blue team side of the house, of how are you able to use embedded AI across your security operations in order to be able to secure what you're doing. And then you get into this kind of broader question, which is that fundamentally the promise of transformer architectures, these are the architectures that underpin things like ChatGPT, is ultimately this idea of democratization. So the field of machine learning has been getting increasingly democratized over the last 15 years, from open source frameworks like PyTorch, TensorFlow, and Keras, leading to things like Amazon SageMaker, or DataRobot, DataHaiku, Databricks offerings, to now anyone inside of an enterprise being able to prompt engineer or just ask a model to have a task, or otherwise known as like AI agents, and thus kind of redefine the nature of how your security operations center or how your cybersecurity policies and cybersecurity methods are created.
Thanks, Neil. Christy, what are your thoughts on humans against of the artificial intelligence, specifically the controls running by AI?
Yeah, so I think it's important for us to step back a second and think about AI and cybersecurity and why are they together and what are they doing? And the answer is data, right? We are putting cyber around data based on the type of data we have, thinking about how do we secure it, who would want it, where is it going to go? When you think about AI, it's about how can I use that data to make better business decisions, to do something that we want created, or to try something new. And so because of that data, I believe, and at DXC Technology, we have something that we've put together called the Office of the AI, where we're really conscious of making decisions about how we protect that data from a cyber perspective, but how also we put AI around that data to ensure that we're doing the right thing in a responsible way. And it really takes a human to start that conversation, right? A bot doesn't have rational decision-making and responsible ethical reasoning. It has rules that have been put in place based on that human. And we need to make sure that we're continuing to put that around the AI and cybersecurity that we have based on the type of data that we have.
Mike, I'm circling back the same question to you.
Yeah, I think human versus AI or against, I look at it this way, is that it's a tremendous tool, right? What Neil and Christy have said. And we all have seen it, we've all been with it, if you will. There's two things that the human interaction for me works with. There's a book called by Malcolm Gladwell. I recommend it to everybody, right? Talking to Strangers. It's absolutely fantastic. And one of the premises is that 90% of us, when we go and we interact with someone, we're trusting whatever they say, right? We're believing that that's their name, and we trust all the way through. So when we interact, and it's going to come up later, which is exciting this afternoon on trusting AI, we trust it, if you will. But then there's that other human element of there's that doubt, and that's what he gets into the book of like, that doesn't sound right. I need to investigate that. I need to check that. And it's one thing, and I think this is the nugget, if you will, that where humans will accentuate AI, and it's in the title of this forum, Imagining the Future with AI. It's imagination. That's what we have. There's not going to be a AI Toni Morrison. There's not going to be a AI Faulkner, Joyce, whatever it is. And that's where I think when we bring our imagination in a positive way to solve problems, I think that's really going to drive. And that's the interaction between the two, the yin and the yang.
Interesting. I actually have something to add myself. So within the financial sector, particularly in the crypto industry, recently we have observed that the crypto exchange platforms have been replacing humans by putting in place AI-driven controls for, controls such as a KYC, know your customer, or ID verification controls where you have to submit government-issued ID. And ironically, we do see deviations in when the bad actors actually are using these completely not humanized controls made by AI decisions in their favor by submitting fake IDs, by fooling purposely the crypto exchange platforms. And in my opinion, we are not there yet to fully AIing, certain controls, especially when there is a monetary losses are in place with AI-driven decisions, specifically when in stake there are $1 million, harming consumers and harming those crypto exchange platforms and businesses. So, Matt, do you have anything to add for this?
Yeah, I think the challenge that you see is that right now today, we have speed and scale are where we're having challenges with our human workforce. And just like Neil mentioned, our SOC operators need to be able to do more with less time and with more accuracy. And so we see it as that automation ML tool that comes across and really turns that one SOC operator into 20, and into the future, you just 10x that. So we want that individual to have that machine speed at their disposal, at the same time to have all the context of all the tools they have in their SOC to kind of tell the story of the alert they have in front of them. So a lot of the challenges we have is that our adversaries are using AI for vulnerability scanning, that threat space, and taking a look from the outside in, what you look like you have as far as a vulnerability. And then they'll get inside your networks and they'll use AI to try and map. And that's where the protections come in that we heard from Mike. And so once they're in that network, it's really abundantly clear that you have to track behavior and finding nuances and difference. So it's not so much finding a needle in the haystack, it's finding a needle that's rolling the wrong way in a haystack. And so it just adds that complexity layer that a human alone just couldn't do. But at the same time, we're not looking to replace any human in our SOC. We're looking to amplify, provide tools, and work from there. And when we talk about the future of AI, we're actually talking about importing expertise. Right now, we're importing tools and context. We don't have that expertise layer yet because we don't trust a lot of what's coming out of these systems because we just don't have the data layer or that expertise built in to train against just yet. So we're looking at that at the same time, making sure we're not becoming overly dependent on tools that don't have safeguards in place. Just like when everyone went electronic with digital records, there was the vulnerabilities of what if someone gets in and creates disruption by going after that data. We have to have those same protections in place when it comes to AI, both the foundational training as well as having an expectation of what that outcome looks like and to know when something looks weird, but to do that from kind of a mirrored algorithm type standpoint and to leverage a lot of the tools that we're seeing on the red team side to make our blue team more robust.
If I can just add one thing here, Dimitri. The speed and scale, it's absolutely where, AI, we see it as a tool that can help us. The thing is, our cyber threat actors do as well, right? So they're seeing it and they're not bound by those same, ethical reasoning and responsible use of AI that I am, right? So we have to be really smart in how we do it, which is why the speed really matters, because this is going to increase the speed of our threat actors just as much, if not more, than what we have when we're defending against it. So we really have to think about that. And then because of the scale at which we're working on this, we really need AI to help us. So the faster we can imagine that future with AI and what we could do, that will help us to think smarter than some of the threat actors that we have about that data that we have that we are protecting at the end of the day and doing something with.
And to give an idea of what speed and scale means, 2 years ago, you had roughly 12 hours to catch an adversary before they started moving laterally on your network. You have about 4 minutes right now. So that's how fast your SOC operator has to catch something, if not initially, immediately. So that's why these tools aren't just a choice, they're a requirement at this point.
From the crypto exchange, industry, I have to say, actually, from the logs that I have reviewed and I've seen those successful attacks on the consumers, it takes less than a minute these days.
Yeah. Yep.
Neil, Mike, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Well, that's why you get into this kind of paradigm really quickly of how are you able to create the conditions for autonomous agents to make their own decisions. Because if you have 4 minutes to discover an attack and that's going down, the number of attacks that you have is increasing at a massive rate. And folks on the other side of the house, so on the red teaming side of the house or on the red side of the house, are using tools like Worm GPT, so offensively fine-tuned generative AI models. You get into this question of how do you deal with that, which is how you get into the question of how do I use AI to defend against AI, and how do I have autonomous agents on both ends of the spectrum. And then you get into this kind of larger societal question, which is we're going to have an increasingly bimodal distribution of technology. We're going to increasingly need to embrace AI while we're in the gray zone, whereas if we were to kind of fall under attack as a kind of nation and all-out kind of cyber war, we need to increasingly look at solutions that are analog and don't require the use of any technology. And you can already see in various places preparations for that being made. The Navy at Annapolis, for example, requiring midshipmen to learn celestial navigation, once again, is a great example of preparing for that future.
Thanks. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'll add, there's a pre-step too that I think we need to add to the equation. CISOs, I'm going to generalize here, if you will, SOCs in a way. Yeah, they're in the prevention, but they also, if there's yellow tape and there's an incident, they're having fun, right? Let's all admit it. They're like, okay, we've got an investigation, here we go, and now we got to look into it. I don't like that. I want no yellow tape. I don't want that to happen. And that's the other side of AI. When you bring in, and it's IT blocking and tackling that it's going to help with, of configuration management, configuration drift, vulnerabilities across the network, and then getting in front of those 4 minutes, in front of that minute, to say, hey, look, I'm configured to where I'm not going to have that yellow tape, and how AI gets, if you will, to the left of the boom, so you don't have a boom.
Thanks, Mike. We do have a little bit of time before we'll start our audience asking questions, so I do have a pop-up question from myself, obviously. So, in regards to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence versus regulatory requirements, of course, I have to say that. Recently, European Union has issued a new legislation called EU AI Act that is requiring to perform necessary assessments to determine specific high-risk tools and applications, defining specific applications for AI developers, and putting enforcement in place after a given AI system is placed into the market. So basically, if you're an AI developer, EU legislation is asking obligating developers to be responsible and putting an enforcement in place. What are your thoughts on this regulation? Because more likely, if the United States would not come up with the same legislation, we will have to adopt it, similar to GDPR legislation that we have to obey EU laws and regulations. Guys, since it's a pop-up question, who would like to take an answer?
And I can jump in. I mean,
Sure.
the challenge you have with any, we'll say, geolocation-based regulation. I mean, the U.S. generates a lot of regulatory turmoil of its own from time to time, but the U.S. really has to look at it from a risk-based approach. So that's the way our regulatory framework is set for critical infrastructure. For example, we don't hold restaurants to the same standard as we do our power company. And so we have to look at the impacts of disruption, the impacts of challenges, and see where those cascade. And that's where those standards and safeguards, that base understanding of what good looks like, gets deployed in the form of regulatory action. The good news is that we have learned a lot in the last few years from a regulatory policy framework, both past administrations, on cybersecurity is a team sport. You've got a lot of collaboration. The difference between good regulatory actions and bad regulatory actions is regulatory done in the dark. And so there's been a lot of information sharing of what is disruptive and what isn't. And with context to the EU, they did tie back to a lot of the principles we share under NIST. They said, you've got to use this risk management framework when you're talking about AI. At the same time, they wanted to put in buffers, like this is the level of security controls you should have. In the US, I'll speak for some of our feds that aren't here, they're looking at how can we interpret that with our existing regs that are on the books and try to shape that. So for example, if you're HUD, do you need an AI regulatory or do you just need an addendum that takes into concerns of automated decision making? And I think that's the way they're leaning right now, but time will tell.
I have a question. Okay. do you have
Sorry,
something?
I just wanted to add one thing to that. The thing about regulation around this, and I'm going to go back to what I said before, our threat actors don't care, right? So we need to go back. We need to understand our own data. We need to understand what that means. We need to apply the right, every company here would say, we're going to apply the regulations as we need to that data, to the AI we put around it, to the cyber standards and controls that we have in place. But the ask is, think about it, be educated on it, so you don't handcuff companies and being able to do the right thing to protect that data in the way we need to, and fight the threat actors when they come our way.
Be outcome-based, not procedure.
Yeah, and if we let's go back and look what happened. So OpenAI and Microsoft announced a year and a half ago or whatever it is, and then remember when everybody's like, okay, all of the brains said, let's all stop develop. How'd that go? Didn't stop, did it?
No, it didn't go well. Yep.
It's continuing, right? Then you had McKinsey did a great AI article in about a year and a half, a little over a year ago, and they talked about that legal is going to be 2 to 3 years behind whatever's developed, however it gets developed, and security is 18 months behind, and that we need to be ready at that pace. And to Christy's point, if you're in a knife fight, you don't dress to the nines. You're in a knife fight, and there aren't rules in a knife fight. So we have to be very careful to exactly what you were saying, Christy, is that we cannot handcuff people because they don't have those same things that we're actually going up against.
There's also another element to kind of the regulatory side of the house. So obviously sovereignty is a pretty substantial element of different countries' regulatory rule setting, where many nations don't want kind of our AI future to be a single country kind of dominating that AI future. And so if you actually look at an interpretation of the EU AI Act, or you look at some of the emerging standards elsewhere, what you'll see is that they're preferencing models that were created in that country, and you're sort of starting to see this idea of sovereign AI. And you're starting to see it the world over, from Europe, which is to some degree preferencing Mistral, to Japan, where you have Sakara AI, to the UAE, where you have Falcon, to obviously China, which has its own kind of independent AI ecosystem, as well as India, which is funding its own kind of foundation model companies at the moment. You have to take the regulatory context and put it into this larger question of kind of independent nation states within the AI context.
Good point. I missed that. Really good point. I have a question from the audience. What are the primary foundational steps security teams can take to improve their AI footprint? Do you want me to read this question again?
Hey, could you read it one more?
What are the primary foundational steps security teams can take to improve their AI footprint?
I can just start a little bit. The first one is education, right? Because this is new technology. It's changing very fast. It's changed the landscape of how we do cyber and how we protect our data and assets, very much so. And we need to educate our cyber teams in the fastest way possible to think about how we can do that in a fast way, because our threat actors are very, very good at this as well. And so it's making sure that I think the education is there, and then thinking about, with everything you do, how do you apply that across the board? And look, this is not something that you're gonna do overnight. You have to experiment and just start. Start somewhere, take a step, and then see where you can go from there, because you're not gonna fix the landscape tomorrow and be like, AI, it's magic. It doesn't work that way.
But it is kind of magic. But the beauty of it is that cybersecurity principles don't go out the window. It's just some of the tools do. And so you still have the foundational need to monitor, you have the foundational need to determine what your expected outcomes are and base against that. And so we do have some doctrine on risk management for AI. There are a lot of partnerships with academia and industry on this already. And so you do have a soft kind of gutter rail on both sides. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a solid foundation to start from if you're looking to introduce AI into your systems.
And let's remember that AI is not new, right? Gen AI is new, but AI isn't. So we've actually been doing this for decades, which is the good news.
Yeah, I think adding to that is also if you're talking about your security team, we all have different adversaries. So you know your adversaries. You should know what their tactics are and then work into what their psychology is. And then instead of going towards the tool, is what I tell my team, is like, what problems are we solving? And what outcome do we want to get? What outcome do we want by solving this problem? And everybody's got unique problems. Capsulize those problems and then go search for the appropriate tool that'll solve that problem.
Nice. I've got a question from Mitch. How can the public and private partnership work together to support cybersecurity in the world of AI?
I can take it.
Private partnership work together with public.
Yeah, so NSA has the Cyber Collaboration Center, C3. They are open doors, right? They have their own building that you can actually go to, and it's very public, and they're looking for
Just
partnerships.
walk in.
You walk in. About 2-3 years ago, they created a special office, and they're looking for that. So that is actually an invitation to work with them. And then CISA has the same things.
What is the name of this place again?
Cyber Collaboration Center.
Nice.
It went from no
Google,
such agency to the National Security Agency about 28 months ago.
Google Morgan Adamski, Cyber Collaboration Center, and there's a whole support there, as well as what Jen Easterly's doing at CISA, DHS.
But I think it's us having these types of conversations where we talk about, does regulation help or hurt, right? Help or harm? What can we do together? What standards should we apply across the board? What things shouldn't be standard across the board? What are our adversaries doing, and how do we go? The more we share that information, the bigger the collective can get in front of some of the issues that we're having across the board. And I think that's that nature of sharing. It started with some of the cyber. I mean, NIST, and the standards that we had from a cybersecurity perspective were a big piece of that. And it's just broadening with AI, that we need to continue to have that sharing, that collaboration, and really be open and work together, because we're all fighting the same fight.
And an example of how it's unique is, a lot of what AI does is dependent on the inputs, but a lot of AI right now is based on recognition of text, recognition of numbers. Like if you think of automated driving. And so that's a great example of one where they can secure that platform on the vehicle, they can secure their software supply chain, but what they have a challenge with is that very smart person that figures out that if you put a tiny reflective square in a specific spot on the speed limit sign, the car thinks it's the wrong number. And that's the type of adversarial AI avenues that we also have to take into context, because these are learning algorithms, and if they get this ingest of kind of the poison pill, what happens and how? And so it's a continual cycle of risk-reward that you have to keep check with. And just there are certain towns in which your automated vehicle, if you have the cruise control set where it spots the signs, will pump the brakes pretty quickly because someone has started doing this across the Northern Virginia area, and it's very annoying. Please stop.
I actually have another question that I'm so happy I don't have to answer. What precautions are you considering to prevent Gen AI apps playing a role in sensitive data leakage or exfiltration of proprietary data from your enterprise?
And we do have an expert right here, so I'm going to...
Well, for a lot of our customers, the solution is obviously to use us as part of that problem. Okay, add over. So really it gets down to this question of how are you actually able to segment what models you're able to use and what permissions you're able to grant, both on a user basis, but then more importantly, because Gen AI is not actually as interesting from a chat perspective as it is from integrating into enterprise apps and into enterprise workflows. And so having a good understanding of what is sensitive data inside of your organization, what permissions have you granted, what models are you running externally in the public cloud, externally in your private cloud, and internally, and being able to segment those use cases is really at the heart of basic kind of data cleanliness, and having that kind of data ontology is really what enables you to actually make sure that you're not leaking sensitive information into a public model.
Mike, did you?
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah. I'm done.
I've got another interesting question, actually. How have your models incorporated defenses against actors trying to corrupt or poison AI systems through identity spoofing or unauthorized access? So this person is asking to share what kind of defenses models have you built around spoofing and logical access.
And I'll tell you that the sad fact of that is the same example with the speed limit sign is you get data introduced into your model that isn't authenticated. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually a good problem to have if you're fighting the ID battle. If you're doing an ICAM solution to protect what's coming into your model, that's a luxury. A lot of these environments have mission data or operational data that is almost a raw feed. And so they have the ability to take on that threat almost outside of your control. See, what you have to do is we operate in a world where we have a lot of sensitive operations that are automated and machine learning, and we can't just allow raw data to feed into just one algorithm. We have to have kind of a sister algorithm that runs right next to it, and you get to compare one that learns and one that doesn't at the same process to see if those outcomes shift and to catch that poison pilling as it goes. You know the demarcation point of known good. And so that's not perfect as a solution, but it's something we're doing with the government right now.
Also, just to add on to that, I spent some time with the DHS panel on this question of deepfakes about 1.5 years ago. And if we're talking about kind of live deepfakes, there are two methods that currently work in terms of actually being able to detect them. One is asking the human or the deepfake to turn to the side. So both sides, because we've been able to create very, very realistic versions of the front and the back of the human being. And the second version, and you can kind of see this if you use tools like ID.me to verify yourself for the IRS or other tools like that, is actually popping other colors, so like red, green, or blue, because it's not possible to have a reflection in the same for a deepfake today in the same way it would be for an actual human.
Nice, Neil, on spot as usual. I've got another interesting question. This question is applicable to all of you. It's going to touch all of your industries. We represent public and for-profit industries here. What are the main challenges in collaborating across government, industry, tech, research and development, and multinational partnerships for effective AI practices? So all of these industries collaborating to develop an effective AI practice. Any thoughts on that? Just use your imagination.
Everybody's looking at me. I'll start. It's a great question. Do you guys have an answer? It goes back to
if you would be a
hit it on the
decision maker and you had to pick, any government agency, any for-profit or non-for-profit organization, and you had access to a tech research and development team, what would be you come up with to build an effective AI practice, since you guys are against a regulatory approach to it?
Not against regulatory.
Not you.
Well, I mean, the AI executive order has a lot of language about advisory boards, and it has a lot of collaborative information in there about how they expect to get some information both ways. So they don't expect it to be a report card from industry into government. They don't expect it to be a risk sheet that's handed back to industry from government. They want it to be a two-way street. They're standing up those boards now, and they're getting forward movement across them. They had to wait till they could get money to do it, so thanks everyone for the appropriations. But that's the challenge that they're putting forward, is they at least know they need the vehicle to do it. And they know they need to do it not in a US-based vacuum. So there's a lot of international collaboration that's coming, and we're seeing that across cyber just the same as we're going to see with AI. Like-minded countries are leveraging groups like NATO and others to really partner on government-to-government engagements and bringing their industry with them. So it won't be one government to one government and then US industry. It's to be an all-together type process.
Thank you, Matt. I've got a follow-up question in regards to this AI regulation. Where should regulators begin? Is data protection or privacy or AI unethical use, like copyright infringement, the top priority? What is the top priority for regulators to start the process of creating a policy to regulate AI?
What are the three choices that they said?
This person gave us a data protection as a starting point, a privacy, or AI unethical use are the top priority where the regulators should begin to develop a regulatory legislation in regards to AI.
The privacy is already set, right, with
Yeah.
privacy laws. So I would say to go by the current, so that would be on top. And then it comes down, from my perspective, on the business, on what's more important, on the data loss side or the IP. And it depends on what business that they're in that they would decide between those two, but privacy is up there.
The interesting question there on the data privacy side of the house is, what do you do when you have an existing set of laws that don't necessarily make sense with where technology has gone? So let's just take GDPR or the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Protection Act, just as an example. One of the core tenets of that is this idea of the right to be forgotten.
The right.
In the context of a really, really large language model, or even a small model, it's not actually possible to be forgotten. So effectively, depending on how you're interpreting the laws, you're in this world where, technically speaking, no large language model is compliant with GDPR. But because it's such a large technological advance, for most intents and purposes, that's being ignored right now. The one time that wasn't ignored was last year. If you all saw in the news, the Italian privacy regulator was threatening to withhold the use of OpenAI within Italy, or asking OpenAI to fix that. And their response was, okay, we're happy to leave the Italian market. And unfortunately, the Italian privacy regulator, or fortunately, didn't want that to happen.
This is creating that weird space, right? Because what Neil just said, that's what us humans do. We get access to private information, we interpret that private information, it is in our head, and then we decide how it's dispersed. AI is just doing that. So is it something that is closer to us, or is it just an application? It's something closer to us. So I think it's going to go into a niche as far as a definition that will be determined through time.
Yeah, and for any regulation, anything that we do, I think it's about managing risk, right? That it's managing risk versus the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And so it's really not just about, should we do privacy first or data protection or ethical use? It's about, what is the greatest risk that we have to manage and mitigate versus what outcomes are we trying to achieve? And that's what should be in place for any type of regulation that we have. Look, we have an amazing economy that sits here in the US that ripples across the entire world. And so if we do something recklessly by putting regulation in place, it could create outcomes that we don't want. So I really want us to think about, as a CIO of a global company, I'm always thinking about, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing for my company? Am I doing the right thing for my customers? Am I doing the right thing for my country? Am I doing the right thing overall? And that's something that we have to be thinking about as it relates to policy and regulation of all of those things matter, and are we managing that risk in the right way? Are we managing those outcomes in the right way? And if you can answer that, then there might be a reason for regulation and policy. There might be a reason to not do regulation or policy in a certain area, but those things have to be considered.
And we're in Washington, D.C., so we have to think, what would the Hill think of this, or what would the White House think of this? And their focus is going to start with government services. We offer a lot of beneficiary services. We have a lot of things that the citizen engages with government on, and they want to make sure that they're leveraging AI, but at the same time, not putting any of that at risk. And so that, if I'm sitting with a member of Congress, that's their first question. Like, where is disruption from what I, as the government, am accountable for, going to need the industry to sharpen up, or the government to be sharpened up in partnership with the industry around? So that's where I would say, if I have my magic 8 ball, it's Beneficiary services is going to be the first where they start to look and say, decision-making for any level of benefit is going to need to have some protection and rigor in place, and then work from there on the critical infrastructure disruption type models.
All right, I think we only have 1 minute left, and I have the last question. Does AI both enhance cybersecurity? Does AI both enhance cyber attacks and lower the entry barriers for malicious individuals? I can read this question again.
Well, yeah, the answer is of course yes. I mean, there are open source, offensively fine-tuned LLMs out there like Worm GPT that anyone can go download and use. So it decreases the barrier to attack and also to some degree decreases the barrier to defense. The question is, how great is the degree on both ends of the shtick?
On spot as usual. Well, thank you so much, guys, for having us. Thank you so much, the George Washington University. That was a great discussion. Thank you so much to all our panelists.
Yeah,
Enjoy the rest of your day.
thank you.